The Indiana Fever are once again at the center of a massive WNBA controversy, and this time the debate goes far beyond one hard foul. What happened between Sophie Cunningham and DiJonai Carrington during a fast break opportunity has turned into a national conversation about player safety, coaching responsibility, accountability, competitive basketball, and the enormous pressure surrounding the Fever. The incident was already controversial when it happened on the court, but Stephanie White's response afterward pushed the story into an entirely different direction. Instead of the conversation ending with Carrington's ejection and the league reviewing the play, questions immediately started surrounding White's leadership and whether she did enough to stand behind her own player. Then Stephen A. Smith entered the discussion and challenged White's explanation, asking how a head coach could be so unaware of a major incident happening during a game she was responsible for coaching. The original incident happened when Sophie Cunningham was running toward the basket on a fast break with an opportunity to score. Cunningham was moving quickly toward the rim when DiJonai Carrington came from behind and made heavy contact. Carrington's arm connected with Cunningham as she was in a vulnerable position, and Cunningham went crashing to the floor. The impact immediately caught the attention of players, officials, and fans inside the arena. It was not simply a normal defensive reach or routine contact during a contested possession. The officials reviewed the play and ultimately upgraded the foul to a flagrant 2, which resulted in Carrington being ejected from the game. The decision made it clear that the officials believed the contact had crossed the line between aggressive defense and an unnecessary and excessive foul. For Cunningham, the situation was especially serious because she had little opportunity to protect herself. She was focused on completing the fast break and was moving toward the basket when the contact came from behind. Whenever a player is hit in that kind of position, the potential for injury becomes a major concern. That's why the league's decision to issue a flagrant 2 immediately became one of the central parts of the discussion. But while many people expected the conversation to focus on the foul itself, the biggest controversy actually developed after the game when Stephanie White spoke to reporters. White explained that she did not see the play clearly in real time because she went directly to the post-game press conference. She said that after watching the replay, she understood how serious the contact was and acknowledged that the foul was egregious. White also said that player safety is a major priority for her and that she takes the health and well-being of her players seriously. On the surface, those comments appeared to address the issue. But another part of her answer immediately created criticism. White also praised Carrington's competitive mentality, describing her as a player who plays hard, competes, and does not allow opponents to simply walk toward the basket without resistance. That combination of comments created a perception problem. Fans heard White acknowledge that the foul was serious, but they also heard her defend Carrington's aggressive style. For critics, the question became simple. Why was the coach spending so much time explaining Carrington's competitiveness when Sophie Cunningham was the player who had just been knocked to the floor? To those critics, White should have made it completely clear that the foul was unacceptable regardless of Carrington's intentions. Supporters of White, however, argue that acknowledging a player's competitive nature does not mean approving of a specific foul. They believe White was trying to distinguish between Carrington's overall playing style and what happened on one particular possession. That distinction did not satisfy everyone, and Stephen A. Smith was one of the loudest voices to challenge White. Smith questioned White's explanation that she did not see the play in real time. His argument was based on the basic responsibilities of a head coach. Coaches spend an entire game watching the floor, following the ball, monitoring defensive assignments, and reacting to what happens in front of them. When a player is knocked down during a major fast break opportunity, especially in a game involving one of the most closely watched teams in the league, Smith believes the head coach should have an immediate understanding of what happened. Smith repeatedly questioned how White could be standing on the sideline, coaching the game, and somehow not see the incident. His criticism was not simply about whether White had a perfect view of every second of the play. His larger point was that the coach's response after the game needed to reflect the seriousness of what had happened. In Smith's view, White's explanation made the situation more confusing rather than less confusing because viewers had already seen the replay from multiple angles. Fans could see the contact, the reaction, and the immediate consequences. That made it difficult for some people to understand why the head coach appeared uncertain about what had happened. The reaction from the Fever fanbase made the situation even more uncomfortable. White was reportedly booed by portions of the home crowd, which is significant because Indiana fans were not watching from the perspective of a neutral audience. They were supporting their own team and their own players. When fans inside a team's home arena begin expressing anger toward the head coach, it usually means the controversy has moved beyond a single disagreement. It suggests that supporters are questioning the direction of the team or the decisions being made by its leadership. Stephen A. Smith highlighted that reaction as evidence that White needed to recognize the seriousness of the situation. In his view, the coach was not simply dealing with criticism from social media. The frustration had reached the arena itself. Fans were making their feelings known in person, and that should force an organization to examine why the relationship between the coach and the fan base had become so tense. Smith argued that White needed to understand the environment surrounding the Indiana Fever and the enormous attention placed on every controversial incident involving the team. The controversy became even more complicated because Stephanie White and DiJonai Carrington already had a history together. Before becoming the head coach of the Indiana Fever, White coached Carrington with the Connecticut Sun for 2 seasons. This wasn't a brief relationship or a situation where White barely knew the player. She coached Carrington, worked with her, studied her game, and watched her develop as a professional defender. That history matters because White had a much deeper understanding of Carrington's playing style than someone who had only watched her from another team. Critics have therefore questioned whether that previous relationship influenced White's reaction. They argue that because White coached Carrington for multiple seasons, she knew how aggressive and physical Carrington could be. From that perspective, White's defense of Carrington after the Cunningham incident appears less like an objective assessment and more like a coach defending a player she previously trusted. Supporters of White see the exact same history differently. They argue that because White coached Carrington, she knows her character and understands that aggressive defense does not automatically mean an intention to injure an opponent. That distinction is extremely important. A foul can be dangerous without necessarily being intentional. A player can make excessive contact while still trying to make a basketball play. The question is whether the contact was necessary, whether it was excessive, and whether the player was placed in an unusually vulnerable position. In this case, the officials decided that Carrington's contact was serious enough for a flagrant 2. That decision stands separately from the question of what Carrington intended to do. The Cunningham incident also brought another controversial Carrington moment back into the spotlight. During the 2024 playoffs, Carrington made contact with Caitlin Clark's eye during a defensive play. Clark was left with a visible black eye, and the incident quickly became one of the most discussed moments surrounding the Fever. Carrington later explained that she did not intend to hit Clark and said she was attempting to make a play on the ball. She said she was unaware that she had made contact with Clark's eye at the time. That previous incident has now been repeatedly mentioned because fans see similarities between the 2 situations. In both cases, Carrington was involved in significant physical contact with the Fever player, and both incidents generated intense discussion about whether her defensive style had gone too far. Critics describe it as a pattern of excessive physicality, while supporters argue that basketball is an extremely physical sport and that isolated incidents should not be used to label a player as intentionally dirty. The truth is more complicated than either side suggests. Defensive players are expected to be aggressive. They are expected to challenge shots, fight through screens, contest drives, and prevent easy baskets. But there is also a clear responsibility to avoid unnecessary contact, particularly when an opponent is in a vulnerable position. That balance is one of the most difficult issues officials, coaches, and players have to manage. Sophie Cunningham herself attempted to keep the discussion focused on basketball. Rather than allowing the incident to become something even larger, she acknowledged that the league would deal with the foul. She also pointed out that she had previously been ejected for a similar type of play and accepted the consequences at the time. Cunningham's comments were important because she was the player directly affected by the foul, yet she appeared unwilling to let the situation become a much larger personal or racial conflict. Cunningham also pushed back against attempts to frame the incident around race. That became especially relevant because Carrington had previously posted a message referencing white privilege following another controversial situation involving the Fever. The post triggered a huge online argument and caused the basketball discussion to expand into a debate about race, social media, and the treatment of players in the WNBA. Once race became part of the conversation, the controversy became significantly harder to control. Supporters on both sides began interpreting the same events through completely different perspectives. Some believed Carrington was responding to what she viewed as unfair treatment, while others argued that bringing race into the discussion distracted from the actual basketball play. Cunningham's response showed that she did not want the foul against her to become a political or racial battle. But the WNBA is operating in an environment where every major incident receives enormous attention. The arrival of Caitlin Clark has dramatically increased the league's visibility, television interest, social media discussion, and national coverage. Every game involving the Indiana Fever is watched closely, and every controversial moment can quickly become a viral clip. That means the players, coaches, referees, and league officials are operating under a level of scrutiny that can be very difficult to manage. Stephen A. Smith argued that White needed to understand that reality. His criticism was that the coach's response did not calm the situation. Instead, it created additional questions. Smith believed that when the league and the Fever are under such intense scrutiny, a head coach has to be extremely careful about how she communicates. Every sentence can become a headline. Every expression can become a viral clip. And every perceived failure to support a player can become a major controversy. White's response emphasized unity, kindness, and the need to avoid division. She argued that the league should not allow fear, hostility, or divisiveness to take over. Her message was essentially that the players and the league should remain connected and focused on basketball rather than allowing outside criticism to tear them apart. From White's perspective, that may have been an attempt to protect the league and her players from an increasingly toxic environment. But critics interpreted those comments differently. They felt White was talking about the wrong issue. Instead of simply acknowledging that the foul was unacceptable and emphasizing her support for Cunningham, they believed she was discussing the broader social debate surrounding the league. That made some fans feel that the coach was more concerned with controlling the controversy than defending her player. The situation became even more serious when Indiana's lieutenant governor publicly criticized White and called for her to be fired. He argued that the Fever needed leadership capable of defending the team's players and handling moments of controversy more effectively. When political figures become involved in a sports team's coaching debate, it is a sign that the issue has moved far beyond a normal basketball disagreement. White then faced additional criticism from fans at home games. The boos became another major talking point because they demonstrated that frustration was not limited to commentators or social media users. There were supporters inside the building who were openly unhappy with the direction of the team. For any head coach, that kind of reaction creates significant pressure. Still, the story cannot simply be reduced to fans booed. Therefore, White should be fired. Coaching decisions need to be evaluated based on much more than one press conference. The Fever's performance on the court, their development, their locker room environment, and their relationship with the coaching staff all matter. A controversial statement does not automatically erase everything a coach has accomplished. Cunningham and Clark have also shown support for White, which is an important part of the story. If the players themselves believe that their coach is trying to protect them, that perspective cannot simply be ignored. Cunningham specifically acknowledged White's history with Carrington and suggested that White may genuinely have had a different perspective because of her previous coaching relationship with her. That creates the central question surrounding this entire controversy. Was Stephanie White protecting a former player, or was she simply explaining why she believed Carrington's foul was not intentionally malicious? Nobody outside the situation can know exactly what White was thinking when the foul occurred. It is possible that she genuinely did not see the entire play in real time. It is also possible that her previous relationship with Carrington influenced the way she described the situation afterward. What can be evaluated is the response itself and how that response was received by the players, fans, media, and organization. And the perception was clearly damaging. For a head coach, perception matters because players need to believe that their coach will stand behind them. When a player is knocked to the floor during a dangerous collision, the immediate reaction from the coaching staff sends a message to the entire locker room. It tells players what the organization considers acceptable and how seriously it takes their safety. White eventually admitted that the foul was egregious after seeing the replay. That statement matters. She did not completely dismiss what happened. She acknowledged the severity of the contact and said player safety was a priority. But her praise for Carrington's competitiveness became the part of the interview that dominated the conversation. That is a lesson in how difficult public communication can be for professional coaches. A coach may intend to say one thing, but viewers may hear something completely different. White may have intended to separate Carrington's overall defensive identity from one specific mistake. Critics instead heard a coach defending the player who injured one of her own players. The difference between those interpretations is exactly why the controversy has continued. Meanwhile, the Fever have to keep playing basketball. Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, Sophie Cunningham, and the rest of the roster have built a team capable of competing at a high level. Clark continues to attract enormous attention. Mitchell provides scoring, Boston contributes inside, and Cunningham brings physicality and energy. The team's success depends on those players remaining focused despite everything happening around them. That is another reason the coaching controversy is so important. Indiana cannot afford to allow off-court drama to become a distraction during a competitive season. The players need clear leadership. They need to know that their coach has their back, that the organization understands their concerns, and that the standards for physical play are clear. At the same time, Carrington's situation should be judged fairly. A flagrant foul does not automatically prove that a player intended to injure someone. The league has procedures for reviewing these incidents, and those procedures exist precisely because intent, contact, and context all matter. Punishment should be based on the evidence rather than social media outrage. The same standard should apply to Stephanie White. Criticism of her comments is fair, but calls for her firing should be based on her overall performance and leadership rather than one controversial press conference alone. If the Fever believe she remains the right coach for the team, they have every right to stand behind her. If they believe the controversy reflects deeper leadership problems, then they have to address those problems honestly. Stephen A. Smith's criticism has therefore become part of a much bigger conversation. He is not simply questioning one sentence from White. He is questioning whether the Fever's leadership understands the extraordinary situation surrounding this franchise, and whether the organization is prepared to handle the attention that comes with having one of the league's biggest stars. Caitlin Clark's presence has changed the level of scrutiny surrounding the Fever. Games that might once have generated limited discussion can now become national stories within minutes. A hard foul becomes a headline. A post-game comment becomes a viral clip. A social media post becomes a debate involving millions of people. Coaches have to understand that environment and communicate accordingly. The WNBA is also dealing with the challenge of balancing its traditional culture with the new attention coming from a rapidly expanding audience. There are longtime fans who have followed the league for decades, new viewers discovering the sport because of Clark, and commentators who are increasingly examining every controversy through a national lens. Those different audiences do not always agree about what the league should look like or how incidents should be handled. That tension is visible in the Cunningham-Carrington controversy. One side sees a dangerous foul and demands stronger accountability. Another side sees an aggressive defender making a basketball play that went too far but was not intentionally malicious. One side believes White failed to protect her player. Another believes White was simply being fair to a player she knows well. One side sees a larger pattern in the league. Another sees fans and commentators turning isolated incidents into unnecessary drama. And somewhere in the middle is the actual basketball. The officials reviewed the play. Carrington was ejected. Cunningham recovered and continued forward. White explained her position. Smith criticized that explanation. Fans expressed their frustration. Other public figures joined the discussion. Now the controversy has become much larger than the original possession. The biggest question moving forward is whether the Fever organization can put the entire situation behind them and refocus on winning. If the team continues performing at a high level, this controversy may eventually become just another chapter in a long season. But if losses, locker room tension, or additional incidents follow, the pressure on White could become even greater. For Carrington, the situation also represents a major test. Aggressive defense has always been part of her identity as a player, but incidents like this force every defender to consider where the line should be drawn. The best defensive players are physical without becoming reckless. They compete without putting opponents unnecessarily at risk. That distinction can define a player's reputation. For Cunningham, the priority should be getting healthy, continuing to compete, and letting her play speak for itself. Her willingness to defend White despite being involved in the incident demonstrates that the situation may not be as simple inside the locker room as it appears from the outside. And for Caitlin Clark, the controversy is another example of the environment she and the Fever now operate in. Every game comes with massive expectations. Every physical interaction is examined. Every teammate's controversy becomes part of the broader conversation around the franchise. That's why leadership is so important. A team with this much attention needs a coach who can manage both the basketball side and the media side. The coach must make tactical decisions, develop players, manage personalities, protect the locker room, and communicate effectively when controversy erupts. Those responsibilities become even more important when the team has become one of the most recognizable brands in women's basketball. Stephen A. Smith believes Stephanie White has not handled this moment well enough. White believes she's been trying to protect her players and prevent a difficult situation from becoming even more divisive. The Fever organization now has to decide which interpretation best reflects reality. Was White simply misunderstood? Did she make a communication mistake? Did her history with Carrington influence her response? Or is there a deeper problem with the way the Fever are handling player safety and accountability? Those questions are not going away simply because the game is over. What happens next will ultimately matter more than the arguments on television or social media. If the Fever continue winning, the controversy may fade. If the organization makes changes, fans will interpret those moves as an acknowledgement that something needed to be fixed. If nothing changes, critics will continue to watch every interaction involving White, Carrington, Cunningham, and Clark. One thing is undeniable: this was never just about one foul. It became a debate about what coaches owe their players, how aggressive defense should be handled, how the league responds to controversy, and how the WNBA manages an unprecedented level of national attention. Stephen A. Smith has made his position clear, while Stephanie White has defended her approach. Now the Fever have to show whether their actions match their words. The final question is simple but difficult. Should the WNBA take further action against DiJonai Carrington? Should the Indiana Fever reconsider Stephanie White? Or should everyone involved accept the official's decision and move forward? Whatever happens next, the spotlight on Indiana is not going away. The Fever have one of the most closely watched teams in the league, and every major decision will be examined. For White, Carrington, Cunningham, and Clark, the best response may ultimately be the same one: let the basketball do the talking. But until then, the debate surrounding this controversial foul, Stephen A. Smith's criticism, and Stephanie White's response is likely to continue.